Welcome to On the Pen Live, a special edition of On the Pen Live, because we've got quite a bit to get into today, and especially with the feedback. Get rid of that. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being the best part of what we do at On the Pen. And I can't wait to get into some really exciting news today. Some news that we saw out of Medicare. The Medicare offices, essentially a document was leaked to the Washington Post today. In that document outlines the Trump administration's pilot program to add obesity medications to Medicare. This is incredible news if you're somebody who is a Medicare recipient and has been long awaiting some action by any administration on adding obesity coverage to Medicare. So this is huge news. We're going to break it down. There's a lot going on in the landscape of accessibility, whether we're talking about compounded medications, whether we're talking about branded medications and Medicare access. There's just a ton going on. And I thought that it was probably an appropriate time to jump on a Friday afternoon and talk about what's going on. So this is a live episode of On the Pen. This is a special edition. So welcome into the chat. Sue the Dude, GLP Journey and Review, welcome. Mike, I see you there. Michelle, welcome. Connie, thank you for being here. So let's get into what's going on today. As we led off at the top, the Trump administration had a document that was leaked. Of course, these things are often intentional, and I believe that this probably was as well. But breaking news today is essentially that Medicare will cover GLP-1 medications for obesity. And this is a pilot program that's going to roll out to some Medicaid plans, apparently in 2026, and then Medicare as early as January of 2027. So we could see coverage as early as January 2027. Now, this was a document that was obtained by the Washington Post, where the Trump administration outlined a plan, a pilot program to launch a 5-year test program that would allow state Medicaid programs and Medicare Part D plans to voluntarily offer coverage for medications for obesity like Zepbound and Wegovy. And so this is a huge piece of news, because as you know, at On the Pen, we've been advocating alongside some of our peers in GLP-1 and obesity content creation. We've been advocating for the passage of the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act, which would sort of codify all this, right? This is action by the administration. Now, you may remember back, and now this is where we're going to get into sort of my take on what's going on, right? You may remember back at the end of the Biden administration, there was some rule changes that were announced that were likely to add Medicare to Medicare the coverage of obesity medicine. Now, when the Trump administration came in January, they looked at this proposal from the Biden administration for a couple of months, and then they axed the proposal, which of course was devastating news to anybody who was looking at this from sort of the tunnel vision perspective of getting coverage through Medicare. But I think what's going on here, and I think what we can begin to unpack from the Trump administration, is they had planned all along to include some form of adding obesity medicine to Medicare, but they were going to use it as a bargaining chip. So what does that mean? What kind of bargaining chip is that? Well, as you may have noticed, the stocks for both Lilly and Novo surged today on this news, as they did back at the end of the year when the Biden administration announced their plan to potentially add GLP-1s to Medicare. You saw a surge in these stocks. Why? Because that would mean a tremendous amount of money would transfer from the coffers of the Medicare and Medicaid programs to the coffers of Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk. As you may know, the list price of these medications, the cost to our system, is over $1,000 a month for these medications, whereas other parts of the world are paying only a couple $100. These are prices that have been negotiated by these countries with the drug companies. Now, if you can remember back to a couple of months ago, the Trump administration actually put out an executive order. An executive order is essentially an order from the executive branch on how to carry out existing law. And there's some law that was passed back during the Biden administration. This law was called the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. And the Inflation Reduction Act baked within it was the ability for Medicare and Medicaid to begin to arbitrate the cost of medications with drug companies. So they had their first round of medications last year. And so very interestingly, there's framework within the law now for Medicare to negotiate the cost of prescription drugs. And so this executive order is sort of wrapped around this idea of reducing the cost of medications for Medicare. And so there's actually law right that exists now that can actually, could actually bring this to fruition. So what the Trump administration has been signaling all along is that they plan to use leverage against the drug companies to get them to comply with this willingly in order to have any real teeth behind this. Because again, it's not law. They can't force the drug companies to comply, but they can coerce the drug companies to comply. And that's really what happened. So I believe what happened is the Trump administration took Medicare and Medicaid off the table for GLP-1s for obesity with the full intent to dangle it like a carrot in front of these pharmaceutical companies to get them to lower the cost of their drugs. In other words, you want to pay or do you want to play in the Medicare, playground, and do you want to sell these drugs to folks on Medicare? Well, then you need to lower the cost of your drugs. And so that's where this most favored nations executive order that we've been covering very closely at onthepen.com, or you can just type in obesity period news to your browser, type in obesity period news. You can get all of the information. We've covered this very, very closely as it has evolved from the patient perspective here. But essentially what you see is an executive order signed by the president to get drug companies to come to the table to arbitrate with other countries who aren't paying their fair share, in air quotes, to bring up the cost of the drug in their countries, and then to bring the cost of these drugs down in the United States. So really using Medicare coverage for obesity medications as a carrot to dangle in front of Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk to drop the cost of their drugs here in the United States. So that's what I believe is happening. Now, like we said, this executive order doesn't really have teeth behind it. So one of the things that the Trump administration has put out in the last couple of weeks is a new program under the FDA, which would allow for an expedited review and approval process of future medications. In other words, right now, a drug approval, once those phase 3 trial ends, a drug approval can take up to 10, 12, 14, 16 months for approval. If they receive a fast track designation from the FDA, that can be whittled down to about 6 months. But interestingly, this new program for companies that are acting in the public interest in developing drugs that meet national priorities, they will offer a 1-month expedited review. Again, this is not like they're reviewing the drug less, but more resources are allocated to that specific drug approval, so that review process can take a much shorter amount of time. So the drug would be approved within a month, right? And so this is another carrot that the Trump administration has dangled in front of Lilly and Novo. I'm using Lilly and Novo, but this is all of pharma, right? This isn't isolated to GLP-1. It's just what we talk about here on this channel. So you see that is something that they've been using as leverage to get them to comply as well. Now, President Trump sent letters out yesterday to the CEOs of all the major drug companies in the country and basically said you have 60 days to comply with bringing the cost of your drugs for Medicare down to most favored nations pricing. Again, that's going to be the lowest price that similar economies to ours pay for the medication. And so ultimately, this would mean a drastic reduction in the cost of these medications for Medicare, save Medicare billions of dollars, and then ultimately allow these drugs to hopefully come to market in the private sector at a reduced cost as well. Now, you've got this carrot being dangled for faster approvals. If a drug can come to market, say 5 months sooner, that is a lot more time for a drug company to make money off of that drug while it's still under patent. So that is a carrot that they're dangling. Now, what I believe is happening in the background is, and this is where you get some really unique insight from On the Pen here, and this is not something you're going to read anywhere else. This is based upon industry chatter, things that we hear around the proverbial water cooler in the GLP-1 space. But 503B pharmacies are the pharmacies that mass produce GLP-1s. And so they were the ones that were mass producing the copies of GLP-1s while the shortages persisted in both the Novo products and the Lilly products, Zepbound and Wegovy, et cetera, et cetera. Now, these 503Bs are outsourcing facilities that can mass produce these medications. But once the shortages of these drugs were ended, so did their ability to mass produce them. And so what you've seen is essentially the shift by these 503Bs to 503A pharmacies. Now there is some contention out there as to whether some of these 503Bs ever shut down and they continue to sell the 503As. That's sort of a topic for a different day. But what has been happening, I can tell you this by firsthand accounts. These 503Bs are ramping up their production again. And they're ramping up production of custom formulations of these medications, right? But they're mass producing. And why do I think this is? Well, I do believe that this is another carrot, perhaps more of a stick, that the Trump administration may be looking to use to encourage Lilly and Novo to comply with most favored nations pricing. What does that mean? Well, ultimately, it means the federal government has the power of enforcement over these medications in terms of protecting the patents. Now, if the administration says, Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, you're not complying with most favored nations, we're going to go ahead and allow compounding of these medications because it's in the public interest. And there is precedent for such a thing to happen. You go back just a couple of weeks ago, we actually interviewed a legislator from the state of Connecticut, which just passed legislation to make their own version of Ozempic. They're petitioning the federal government to use previous statutes because it's in the public interest to manufacture their own version of semaglutide. So this is another lever or another stick or another carrot or however you want to couch it that the Trump administration can ultimately use to say, well, you want us to shut down the compounding, you better reduce the prices of your branded medications. You want us to enforce your patents, you have to comply with most favored nation pricing. You have to reduce the price. And so these were pretty strongly worded letters, which again, these drug companies may have just thrown right in the trash and they're just willing to go to the mat over this. But ultimately, the federal government does have some levers that they can pull to apply pressure to these drug companies to reduce their prices of their medications and get them to comply with most favored nations pricing. Now, we have, like I said, covered this extensively at OnThePen, and this, I think, is a really positive development. The most favored nations is one of the most unique approaches to lowering the cost of prescription drugs that I have ever seen. We have been dealing with this in our own family. My wife is on rheumatoid arthritis medication, right? And just this past week, she was denied by the insurance company. Well, come to find out, and this is some very interesting news that I did not know. In my own state, we passed legislation that now makes it illegal for pharmacy benefit managers to switch a medication that a patient is stable on. So if you've been on a medication and you're stable on that medication and you live in the state of Iowa and your PBM says, hey, we're not going to cover this medication anymore, they are in violation of the law. So we were denied by our PBM. Our doctor filled out a denial for us and basically said, you're in violation of this law here in the state of Iowa. And within 24 hours, that decision was overturned, right? And so all of this to say, the cost of these medications coupled with the lack of willingness for the PBMs to cover medications that they're not directly benefiting from, because ultimately it wasn't that they wanted to put us on a cheaper drug. They wanted to put us on a drug that they make more money on. That's what this all comes down to, because the PBM system, the middlemen in this country have profoundly broken our healthcare system so that it no longer acts in the interest of patients. It acts in the interest of investors and the interest of the C-level executives in these boardrooms. And so ultimately, most favored nations at a national level is probably one of the most potentially impactful things that we could see in terms of legitimately bringing down the cost of prescription drugs in this country. I'm going to open this up to questions, but I believe that the compounding is being used as a stick. I believe that the fast track medications is being used as a carrot, and all of this is being used to force compliance by the drug companies to most favored nations, which could potentially, based upon the wording in this letter, bring down prices of medications within the next 60 days in this country. And so that will be a very interesting thing to see unfold. And I am here for it. We're going to be covering it wall to wall. Debbie said just a tidbit about compounding. At least one telehealth that had stopped compounding tirzepatide for new patients started up again today. A well-known reputable 503A that had stopped had resumed too. I've heard the same. One of the things I think that's interesting, Debbie, is you've seen this ramp up from the 503Bs to make compounded tirzepatide. It seems like perhaps you've seen a hole punched in the armor of Eli Lilly in terms of their decision to go after Empower Pharmacy, who didn't sue back, but they challenged the patent on tirzepatide, and now that's being duked out in court. I think that perhaps you see a chink in their armor, and that there could be some sort of, let's say, what's the word I'm looking for? It's always like one word that I'm looking for, and no other word will suffice. But it's essentially what you see here is some sort of liability with the tirzepatide patent that Eli Lilly really doesn't want to face in court, and these 503Bs could potentially be saying, "Yeah, hey, we're just gonna fight you on your patent, so go ahead and sue us, bring it on. We're going to fight you on your patent." 1 month of a 503B compounding. Think about the math here with me, folks. In the last year, what we learned in the lawsuit that the OFA filed against the FDA in the compound tirzepatide, compound semaglutide lawsuits is that over 80 million doses of sellable compound tirzepatide were made last year by 503Bs. 80 million, right? Now imagine that for that $80 million, these compound pharmacies are making, $50 a unit. This is an exorbitant amount of money that the 503Bs are making. So when you talk about litigation, it's kind of like bring it on. That's just a couple of weeks worth of selling tirzepatide. And so I think you see some brazenness, maybe because there's a chink in the armor, some exposure that Lilly has with the patent of tirzepatide. We'll see how that all shakes out in court. But of course, the compounders could be shut down by regulators if the administration so sought to. But for some reason, they feel empowered to do so. And I think what you're going to see is more and more telehealths getting back on board with the compound tirzepatide. What happens now if Lilly decides, hey, we're going to lower the cost of Zepbound to $199 or $299, or Novo Nordisk says the same for Wegovy. I believe that what we're seeing here could be a tectonic shift in the cost and affordability of GLP-1 medications. There's a lot happening at once. It's very easy to get whiplash here, but with the ramping up of compounding of tirzepatide, even in the absence of the shortages, documents being leaked about Medicare coverage for GLP-1s, and then this most favored nations thing, all these things are I believe related to one another. And I think at the end of the day, I'm hopeful, I'm bullish that this benefits patients. Michelle wants to know what other state has that law and what is it called? I want to look it up in my state. I don't know. I was just made familiar with this law in the state of Iowa in the past 72 hours. So this is tremendous news, but you can look it up in the state of Iowa. Just ChatGPT, maybe. What if a patient is stable on a medication? Can a PBM change it? Where is it illegal? Maybe good for Google or ChatGPT. The chess pieces are on the board, says Mike on a mission. Welcome, Mike. Mike just did an interview with our friends over at The Downsize. Make sure you go over and check that out. Mike is one of my favorite people in the GLP-1 community, but says the chess pieces are on the board. This is exciting. I just hope we write it into law, just not executive order. I think both, and I know you know this, Mike, but both are trying to be done. You've got a bipartisan appetite in the House and the Senate to pass the executive order as law, right? They basically have introduced it as a bill. Ro Khanna out of California, a Democratic representative out of California, introduced legislation into the House to do just that. So we hope that happens, and we eagerly await the outcome, right? This is a bipartisan issue here, addressing the disease of obesity seriously as a country. It's like there's no point in having a conversation about the future of the economy, about the future of healthcare dollars, about the future of military readiness in this country. There's no point in having that conversation if we can't get the disease of obesity fixed and under control. Now we have medications that exist to do just that, and we have a once in a lifetime opportunity to sort of galvanize as a country and say enough is enough. We pay too much for our prescription drugs, in this country, and it's high time that the rest of the world starts splitting the cost on the development of some of these medications. I mean, you think about GLP-1 medications. They were developed in the United States with public funds, and now they're being sold back to us at an exorbitant cost compared to the rest of the world, and we're just supposed to take it. I think those days are numbered, and I'm hopeful that those days are numbered, and I'm hopeful that this effort to get pharmaceutical companies to lower their costs is a positive one and a successful one, because I think that means more access to more people, especially our friends on Medicare who have no option. They don't qualify for the savings cards offered by the manufacturer because that's also against the law for them to be offered to patients on Medicare. Most people don't know that. The savings cards, you can't get them. It's not because the evil drug companies aren't letting you get them. It's because our government is blocking you from getting them. It's been codified. They don't want drug companies marketing to patients and senior citizens. So the savings card programs are seen as such. So if Medicare doesn't cover it, you're just up the creek with no paddle. Happy to take any other questions. We got a few minutes left here. Appreciate everyone joining here. If you could do me a favor, hit the thumbs up button wherever you're watching. Share this with anybody who might find this information beneficial or helpful in any way. This is breaking news here on the topic of accessibility, something that we follow very closely here at OnThePen. If you're not signed up for emails, please do so at obesity.news. That's obesity.news. Just type that into your browser, obesity.news. You can sign up there for our email alerts. Michelle says, in Iowa, House File 626, enacted in 2024 and effective early 2025. Yep, January of 2025, exactly. Prohibits non-medical switching for patients who are medically stable on their current medication. That is absolutely amazing. Neo Queen said, Dave, you're looking really well. I hope you're feeling good too. I'm going to do a personal update soon. I have never felt better in my adult life than I have in the last few weeks. I've made a lot of lifestyle modifications to make sure that I'm feeling good. I've done a ton. And so I'm feeling great. I'm thankful for how I'm feeling, and a personal update on my personal journey is long overdue and will be coming soon. So make sure that you hit subscribe if you're on the YouTube channel here. I know a lot of people like to follow people's personal stories. Mine has been a story that is less told on social media, right? It's what happens when these medications don't work? What happens when you regain on these medications and you're at the top dose? These are all serious questions to be considered and difficult things to work through as a patient. And so I will be doing that update. So make sure that you hit subscribe. Make sure you hit the thumbs up button as well. Any other questions before we jump here? I would be happy to take a few more questions here. Happy Friday to everyone. I hope that you're all having a great week. I hope that you got great plans for the rest of the weekend to spend with your loved ones, to do something special. The summer days are dwindling here very fast. And so I hope that you all got good plans to make the most of it. Hey, Jazzy, welcome. Thank you for being here, folks. Shelly said, so terrific to hear you're doing well. Wonderful to hear, Dave. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Really appreciate all the sentiment and the positive vibes you all have given me. So to recap, Most Favored Nations is got the full weight of the executive branch behind it. They are leveraging all of the levers that they have to get these drug companies to comply with Most Favored Nations, which would bring the cost of prescription drugs in this country, at least for Medicare and Medicaid in the interim, down to prices that are similar to what the rest of the world pays. Like, imagine if tomorrow, all of a sudden, Medicare could get medications at a fraction of the cost from what they're getting them today. That does a lot for the solvency of that program and the long-term health of the Medicare program. So we hope to see that happen. What hoops will Medicare patients have to jump through with 2026 cut coming? I don't know. I don't know about any cuts to Medicare specifically. I'm unaware of any cuts coming to Medicare. Medicaid is another thing. I believe that they've changed some of the qualifications for what people who are of working age and able-bodied have to do to stay on it. To my knowledge, those are the changes that have happened, but I'm unaware of any real changes that have come to Medicare. But at the end of the day, if they're able to get Most Favored Nations through, how much would that impact the solvency of that program? It's sort of like one of these federal programs that are unsustainable in terms of how many people they can cover and what they're taking in and what they're spending. So of course, something has to be done. Michelle said, enjoy your podcast. Aloha from Kauai. Aloha. You should interview the guy from Forest Park Pharmacy. I've reached out to him a couple times. I have. I hope that he reaches out back. I would love to talk to the gentleman from Forest Park. A very interesting guy. Spoonie, welcome. You're in our thoughts and prayers here as a community. She says, glad to hear you're doing well. Miss your lives. Yeah. I plan on, and I'm very curious. Please send me an email at David on the Pen. I plan on bringing back our On the Pen live show. Do plan on doing that. How I do it, I'm not sure yet, but I plan on doing that for the fall. So look forward to that. I definitely want to bring that back for the fall. It's been nice. And the Lord knew I would need a break this summer with all the health things that I went through. I'm glad that we were able to take that step back before things kind of hit the fan. And now that I'm feeling well and sort of have my health under control and everything like that, I think that it's time to bring that back. Chriselle says, I joined the channel recently and I get excited when your daily alerts for lives. Well, thank you so much, Chriselle. It's nice to meet you and thank you for being here. Thank you for being a member of the channel. For those of you who are members of the channel, thank you very much. I'm going to bounce. I got some things that I got to take care of before the end of the day here, but thank you for being with me today. Thank you for being the best part of what we do at On the Pen. As soon as this stream ends, go back to the video and give it a comment. Help boost it. Make sure you hit that thumbs up button. And always, if you're listening on the podcast, leave a 5-star rating and review. Thank you for being here. And we will catch you on the next one. A really interesting video, by the way, is going to drop here in about 24 hours on the channel. I hope you'll check that out too. And we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks, bud.